for coming today to this panel discussion about who exactly is benefiting from the government's austerity policies. I suspect that part of the talk might be quite short. I'll start by introducing our fantastic panel. Then I will talk very briefly about the context for this debate. Each of them will talk for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll sort of open out the discussion. So we have at the end here Eleanor Lisney, who is the founder of Sisters of Frida, a cooperative of disabled women. She's the co-founder of Disabled People Against Cuts, director of community organisation Connect Culture, and a member of the British Council's Disability Advisory Panel. Eleanor played a huge part in ensuring disabled women were mentioned in the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women report in 2013, and is a strong advocate of accessibility and universal design. In the middle, we've got Rosie Rogers, who is a feminist activist. She's national coordinator at Compass and an active member of UK Uncut and UK Uncut Legal Action. She's been involved in various feminist campaigns, especially with the group UK Feminista, and has been actively campaigning against the government's cuts since 2010. She also played a large role in organising a UK Uncut action where over 40 branches of Starbucks were transformed into creches to highlight the audacity of Starbucks not paying their taxes at a time when women's services are being cut. And so, yeah, very cool. And then we have Zita Holbourne, who is an award-winning trade union and community activist. She's a poet, a visual artist, a writer and curator. She's the co-founder of the anti-austerity group Barrack, Black activists rising against the cuts, and is also involved in a range of anti-cuts, justice and community campaigns and organisations. She has been elected to the TUC Race Relations Committee and won the Positive Role Model for Race Award at the National Diversity Awards in 2012. And I just wanted to mention, I loved what she said at that event. She pointed out that all the people in the various equality categories of the awards represent the majority. We are not a minority or an add-on, we are society. And my name's Kiera Cochran. I'm a staff writer at The Guardian, so I have far less expertise in this subject than everyone on the panel, so I'm going to talk very briefly. But essentially, I don't know about the people in the audience, but for me, kind of looking around the last few years, it's felt like we're facing a very, very strange landscape that's changing very, very quickly. So it's a landscape of bedroom tax, of workfare, of zero-hour contracts. I spent quite a lot of time last year talking to food bank managers, and the stories they told me sort of stuck with me quite strongly. There was one who had a family referred to her, and she said this was kind of a typical story. The family had been referred to her because they couldn't afford to give their child breakfast or really, any sort of regular meals, and so their child had been eating crayons at the nursery school, and that was how it had been discovered that the family, we're one of the 10 richest countries in the world, really couldn't afford to feed their child. I spoke to another food bank manager who was saying that she was seeing people come 11 miles at times to pick up bags. And when you've been to food banks, you're picking up maybe 5, 6 bags of quite heavy tins, this sort of thing, and then having to walk 11 miles with those bags home. They were having to put together packages which were kettle boxes, so for people who couldn't afford heating and who couldn't afford to heat their food, could only afford a kettle, and cold boxes for people who couldn't afford the kettle. So it's a very, very tough landscape, and it's a landscape that is particularly affecting women. The Fawcett Society, which is the country's leading campaign for equality, has been talking about this a lot over the last 4 years. Yeah, it would be 4 years. And describing the situation for women as triple jeopardy, because women are disproportionately affected by cuts to benefits, to services, and obviously to public sector jobs. So the government has estimated that more than 900,000 public sector jobs will be axed in the coming years, and women make up 65% of that workforce. So it's expected that around twice as many women as men will lose their jobs. And when you look at actually breaking that down more closely and more specifically, you can see that some groups are going to be especially hard hit. So for instance, 45% of just over 45% of black women of Caribbean origin who are in paid work are in the public sector. So they're going to be incredibly hard hit by those cuts. Now I'm going to hand it across. Eleanor, can you start?
Wow. Right, okay. Hi, I'm Eleanor, and I've been introduced, so I'm not going to do the introduction bit. I was going to start with saying that in the years 2010, when the spending review was, because when the condemned government started, John Domokos of The Guardian invited us for DPAC, come down to London to talk about DPAC. I said that we will be returning to Victorian times and that the cumulative effects would be felt. And people said that I was scaremongering at that time, but I think we can see that, that unfortunately that is happening. But I don't think that any of us saw the extent of the cuts then, because we didn't foresee that people would be driven to suicides because they have no recourse to benefits that cap a modicum of independent living. Disabled people suddenly have to justify and prove their impairments. Previously, we wanted to prove how we could live normal lives. Let me give you an example of the cumulative effect of austerity and the social welfare reforms for a disabled person. Let's name her Jane. Jane is a wheelchair user. She works part-time at a charity. Her health does not permit her to work full-time, and it's not easy to get a job as a disabled person anyway. She manages to have a reasonable independent life. She lives frugally. She gets the disability living allowance, and she uses it to get a car through something called Motability, which she uses to get to work. She gets a care package from her council, not much, but enough to get her shower and get dressed for work during the week. She has a 2-bedroom council bungalow because she needs an accessible home. Well, this is the case in Coventry anyway, which is where I come from. One day she gets a letter from the DWP, ATOS, saying she needs to be assessed for the DLA. They declare that she's no longer eligible for the DLA, which means not only has she not got the money anymore, but she no longer has her car, so she can't get to work. She's not very good at managing buses, but then she doesn't have a free pass without the DLA, because the DLA is a gateway to a whole load of other concessions. So she loses her job. Her council decides to cut down her care package because of budget cuts. She lives on her own, and suddenly she doesn't know how to cope. Her health goes spiraling down. She can't go shopping because she hasn't got her car anymore. She doesn't know how to do online shopping because she's not internet savvy. So they put her on ESA, and then ATOS say she's fit to work. She finds it difficult to get to the Job Centre Plus, so she gets sanctioned. She has no money to feed herself or pay her utilities, and then they say, since she lives on her own, she has to downsize because of the bedroom tax. But the council put her there because it was the accessible place. There are no accessible one-bedroom flats. So she can't pay, and she can't move. She gets very depressed. She's about to be made homeless. She has no idea what to do next. So are we surprised she gets suicidal? And are we surprised that disabled people who are caught in this vicious cycle do commit suicide? as one near me called Stephanie Bottrell, because of the bedroom tax. People who are least able to fight back. Loss of legal aid means that it gets more difficult to fight back. Another of those cuts with effects on disabled people. And I have not even mentioned those with mental health issues, whose stress levels is exacerbated by the cuts, nor those with learning difficulties. I have not mentioned the ridiculous hoops the assessment made people to go through by ATOS, only to say that they're fit to work for jobs that do not exist. And alongside this is the scapegoating of disabled people as scroungers. And hate crime, disability hate crime, is on the increase. So we have been fighting against the closure of something called the Independent Living Fund. The Independent Living Fund enables disabled people to live, work, study independently. This support is valuable for people with severe impairments. There was a court appeal in November that squashed the original closure decision. However, the closure of the Independent Living Fund, announced by the government yesterday, is a devastating blow for thousands of disabled people who rely on it. 18,000, if I remember correctly. Removing this lifeline risks seriously reducing the quality of life of users. It means that they will be forced into residential care. They say that local authorities will pick up the responsibility from June 2015. And people who know local authorities will know that these funds are not ring funds, and that council support will be driven by budgets rather than need. I am not sure how the government can overturn the court ruling, but many of my friends are devastated by this. Independent living will be difficult for them, and they might be left by services where they have to decide between going to the toilet or having a cup of tea. How many people, non-disabled people, have to make that choice? And many of them have jobs. They are artists, administrators, and yes, just as Tanny Gray Thompson, who was here earlier on, they can even be in the House of Lords. But yet, they will be affected by this. Last night, the night before, on Wednesday, I was out celebrating the lives of disabled women at the Southbank for International Women's Week. Anne Pridmore, who was one of the original defendants in the case, told about how something like the ILF made a change in her life. She said she was fighting for young disabled people now as well. Disabled people have fought hard for disability rights in the last 2 decades. And we are being put back further than that. So austerity bites very, very heavily, and the cuts on disabled women. And I think I'm going to stop now because my 5 minutes is up.
Yeah, but that was brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Rosie?
Thanks, Eleanor. So good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I think it's really great that WOW is making this space to talk about cuts, because it is a political thing. So I'm really honoured to be just sitting next to all these amazing women. It's a bit overwhelming. And I just came from the legal aid protest, actually, outside Westminster, and there was about 500 people there, loads of barristers and solicitors fighting back against cuts to legal aid, and so many women there, and it was because obviously legal aid is really going to hit women a lot. So fight back's still going on even right now, so it's great. So I'm here because I've been fighting back against the cuts since 2010 with UK Uncut and various other feminist groups. UK Uncut uses creative civil disobedience to highlight alternatives to the cuts, We've done a lot of joint actions with groups like DPAC and Southwell Black Sisters and Keep Our NHS Public, which are full of amazing women, let me tell you. Our protests are creative and fun and about alternatives. So, for example, transforming Vodafone stores into hospital waiting rooms to highlight the issue that it's not okay for the government to cut our NHS whilst letting Vodafone off £6 billion in tax, which is just outrageous. On a personal level, my mum lost her job in the cuts, and my brother has severe autism, and we're being really affected by that. So I'm pretty angry. So I don't want to spend ages rolling out stats, and I think we heard a sobering one earlier, because obviously it's horrendous out there for women who are affected by the cuts. But this one in particular does make me take to the streets, and just means that whenever I've been in debates before, and certain people, including men, have said, "Oh, women aren't disproportionately affected by the cuts." So it's a good stat to say if that happens. So this was out in February last year, again from the Fawcett. So to date, in February last year, 14.9 billion worth of cuts were made to benefits, tax credits, pay and pensions, and 74% of that amount were taken from women's pockets. 74%. So if anyone says that women aren't disproportionately affected by the cuts, you can shove that stat in their face. So I think it's kind of hard sometimes to talk about the cuts, and we're here in the Southbank, it's a beautiful day. It's not like the cuts are directly in our face when we're walking around, but we're actually in the borough of Lambeth, where I live as well. And Lambeth Save Our Services and Save Lambeth's Women Project have been firefighting the cuts since 2010. So just within this borough in Lambeth, in 2013, £4.9 million was cut from children's services in Lambeth alone, and £240,000 was cut from its floating support service for vulnerable women. So it just kind of brings it home a bit when you think about the context of just two things that have happened down the road from here. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about the big picture. So first I'm going to go global. And in my opinion, I think that until we overcome structural inequality, patriarchy, and reimagine our economy, the cuts will always, always hit women the hardest. So austerity isn't just something affecting women in the UK, sadly, it's also global. It's happening everywhere. And somehow it's always hitting women the hardest. Studies have shown time and time again that when the IMF come rolling into Sudan or Greece, or probably Ukraine in the near future, what's the first thing to go? Childcare services, cuts to sexual violence services, jobs usually done by women, etc., etc. So when we think of the cuts, I think it's just worth remembering the context. This is happening everywhere, which is horrendous, but also gives us loads of amazing opportunities to have a more united global fight back against these austerity packages. So now to the national picture. Well, unluckily for us, Cameron, Clegg and Osborne completely love austerity, and strangely enough, they're not exactly leading the fight back against patriarchy. So that leaves us in a little bit of a pickle. And with the austerity package, kind of what I'm talking about earlier about the triple layers of just horrendousness, I think the austerity packages are affecting women here in three main ways. So firstly, cuts to services used by women that women depend on. Childcare services, EMA, rape crisis centres, domestic violence services, legal aid, you name it, they are first on the chopping block from the government. Women's Aid did a survey in December and found, they did like a kind of day in the life of refugees survey, and they found that in one day 155 women and more than 100 children were turned away from one refuge in one day. I mean, it's completely insane. And that nearly, out of all the services they audited, nearly half, 48% of the services were running without government funding. So it just shows you how horrible out there it is, but also the absolute resilience and strength of the women out there that are rising to these challenges and taking it upon themselves to sort out their communities and their loved ones. So secondly, women are losing jobs and financial autonomy because of the cuts to our welfare state and our job. Benefit cuts are leaving women without money to get the bus, their minimum paid jobs, which is an issue as well on its own. They're being left not able to pay the rent. It's leaving them to not afford childcare and have to go back into work even if they don't want to. And in local government, as we were kind of saying earlier, 3 in 4 staff members are female, so it's no wonder that when the public sector jobs go, it's twice as many women affected. So lastly, as I kind of alluded to, women are filling the gaps the government are making, but for free, which is so frustrating. The economy is really, I think, the belly of the beast when it comes to cuts affecting women. So the way our economy is structured is only further harming women. So for example, with the Women's Aid Survey, when they say, you know, we're running these services without government funding, it's because when George Osborne slashes the budget, he knows that women will step up to do that work for free. And our government and our economy sees that unpaid work is totally fine. And until that stops, I think women are just going to continually be exploited and worse off from the cuts. And I think really the economy exists to serve people with privilege and relies on women to pick up the slack. So when George slashes the NHS, he knows my mum will look after my gran with dementia for free. He knows that women working in domestic violence services will pick up the slack with the communities and friends and families of the abused. But surely we need an economy that values people, the planet, care work, etc., and well-being. So I could go on, but there's so many layers about why women are affected more than men, but also there's obviously other layers like black and ethnic minority women and disabled women being affected even more, which I know we'll talk more about. So I just wanted to briefly talk a bit about UK Uncut and some of my favourite actions. So my favourite UK Uncut action so far, well, one of mine, was, when we did a joint action with Southall Black Sisters, and we targeted 45 Starbuckses all over the UK, from Northern Ireland to Torquay, you know, very political Torquay apparently, and transformed them into creches and services for women to highlight it was ridiculous. The government were cutting services to women while Starbucks were not paying a penny, not a penny in corporation tax, despite using our roads, you know, getting their rubbish cleaned up by our public services, etc. So it was totally beautiful. We had women and kids playing games, talking about the services they'd lost. There was paint and balloons and comedy and music. It was really great. Another one of my favorite was in May 2012, during the Jubilee street party time. I don't remember, David Cameron went out there and said, go and have a street party and celebrate all the great things. And this was when the government had just, you know, done the latest budget and women were just going to get pounded by the cuts. So we had our own street party outside Nick Clegg's house. Lol. It was amazing. So we had 400 uncutters went outside the one of the architects of Austerity, Nick Clegg's house, to have our own street party. But we had it in sunshine with bubbles and kids. It was really great. And just a little story, I on the day was responsible for herding a crowd of mums and kids to the protest, which I love that job. And we got to Nick Clegg's house, and basically we turned up, and there was this line of policemen who were like, because we were really late to the protest, but it's fine. It's not my fault. And we turned up, and we were really late, and there's a line of policemen who were like standing there in like this big row, locked arms, you're not getting in. There's about 18 mums, kids, etc. And I was like, oh, we're gonna have to go home, I've ruined it. I felt really sad. And this mum out of nowhere just went, kids, charge! And it was awesome. And there's nothing like seeing 40 kids literally just run at the police. And it was incredible. And obviously they just dropped their arms in panic and we all joined the protest. So that was amazing. And it learned an important story. No matter how scary and violent the police can be, they are nothing in the face of 40 kids running at them. And that's it. The fight back is incredible. Uncut have done a lot of actions with groups like DPAC and Keep NHS Public, and I've had the privilege to meet so many amazing women. I've seen women chain themselves to street lamps outside Downing Street. I've seen Shirley, a 93-year-old woman, lie down in the middle of the street, in the middle of Westminster Bridge to stop traffic to try and save the NHS in a last-ditch attempt at a protest. I've just seen women do amazing things. One woman who came to a protest about the bedroom tax in a wheelchair, and despite being on medication, almost fainting in pain, she chained herself along with 20 other women from DPAC and other disabled groups to Oxford Street, along the middle of Oxford Street, just grinding Oxford Street to a halt to get media coverage about opposition to the bedroom tax. I mean, it's incredible. And just 2 weeks ago, the mums of E15 and Newham, 20 of them, I think more than 20, and their kids occupied East Thames Housing Association and Newham Council to demand better creches. And you should really check out their video, because these women, you know, they're not trained in direct action. They don't work for NGOs. They're just pissed off and they're doing something about it. So the fight back's out there, and I really look forward to talking about that more. So what's in front of us? Well, next budget's gonna be worse for women, I'm sure. But I'm also really excited about the fight back and the ways to reimagine the economy. So bring it on, George. Thanks.
Thanks, Rosie. Right, Zita.
Well, greetings, everybody, on the eve of International Women's Day. I think it's empowering to be here, you know, amongst so many women, and really good to see some men supporting the women and what's happening to us. I co-founded Barrack UK in the summer of 2010 with a community activist, Lee Jasper, because we anticipated that the cuts that the Tories were announcing they were going to make were going to have a disproportionate impact on black communities, black workers and black service users. And when I use the term black, I'm using it in the political sense. So I'm talking about African, Caribbean, Asian, Arab and so on people. And we knew that the campaigning we'd done against cuts, because there had been previous rounds of cuts under the Labour government, you know, and they'd been sort of separate. So, you know, we'd run them in our trade unions, or we'd run them in local communities, that we needed something that would bring people together across the UK. So we set up Barrack UK, and it's a national organisation, but we also have regional structures. So we have Barrack in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Glasgow, in London, and so in Bristol, and in different cities and towns. And what we said basically is that if there were groups of people that wanted to come together and campaign against the disproportionate impact of cuts, get together, launch yourselves and call yourselves Barrack. So we didn't want to be bogged down, you know, with bureaucracy, because it was about getting up and standing up and fighting against the cuts. But we had a particular concern about the disproportionate impact on black women. So when we were established, our mission statement set out in particular that our campaign had a focus on the double impact on black women and on young black people. And the reason why there was a disproportionate, and still is a disproportionate impact on black women, is because of the cuts that were being made to the public sector. And the public sector is the largest employer of women, but it's also the largest employment area of black people. So if you're a black woman doing a frontline job, and a lot of black women suffer discrimination, even though they work in the public sector, they're held back in the frontline jobs, in the lowest grades, on the lowest pay, for years, even decades, that they were going to be hit disproportionately by the cuts. And what we've had in the public sector is not just job cuts. We've been told that we have to pay more into our pensions, work longer and get less out of them. So that has a knock-on impact on your salary. My pension contribution as a public sector worker, as well as being a community and trade union activist, you know, I have to earn some money, so I am a public sector worker, is tripled in the last 2 years. So that has a knock-on impact on my salary. My pay, public sector workers' pay, has been frozen. Civil servants' pay has been frozen for around 4 years now, whilst the cost of living is going up. So that has an impact on those black women. So but it isn't just about, you know, the cuts and the attacks on black women as workers. It's also about the services. Black people tend to live in the most deprived areas of the UK, and the reason for that is because of the discrimination that they already face in the labour market and in society that force them to live in the poorest areas. But actually those poorest areas are the areas where the deepest cuts to budgets have been made in terms of local authorities. And in terms of job cuts, if you look at London boroughs, to give you an example of how disproportionate the impacts are, there's several London boroughs where black women workers working for local authorities make up between 3 and 5%, 8% of the workforce. But when it came to cuts, job cuts and redundancies, they made up 40 to 55% of the job cuts. So it's a clear disproportionate impact. But also the services that we rely on, whether that's youth services, you know, youth centres, refuges for women escaping domestic violence, childcare, all of those services have been impacted. And the second biggest area where black women are employed is the voluntary sector. And the voluntary sector have lost their funding because of the cuts to central and local government, because that's where all their funding comes from. And we've seen specialist services that black communities and black women rely on in the local areas having to close their doors over the last 2 or 3 years because their funding's been cut, or they're surviving, out of a front room on no budget at all and just working on the will of individuals to get to do that work on a voluntary basis, which has already been mentioned. Actually, women are making the country run, but we're doing that on a voluntary basis. We're not getting paid for the work we do, and that shouldn't be the case. So the impact on young black people also has an impact on black women. Women are primary carers of children, so the welfare cuts, the cuts to benefits and working tax credit, again, reduces salary. And what we're seeing, there are public sector workers that are having to go to food banks. So it isn't just people that are unemployed, it's working families that have not got enough income coming in. There are people, amongst my members of my union who are having to make serious decisions on a weekly basis about whether they pay a bill or whether they put a meal on the table for their children, and that can't be right. The cuts that the government are making are ideological. They're not cuts that they need to make to meet the deficit. It's an attack on the poorest. If you look at who runs the government and cabinet ministers, they're rich. They come from rich backgrounds. They had money. They don't need to be in politics for the money. They're certainly not in politics because they care about people. And actually, as local constituency MPs, that's why they should have entered politics, because they actually want to serve the communities that they're based in. And they certainly aren't serving the communities that they're based in. Their ideological cuts is 120 billion lost each year through tax evasion, tax avoidance and uncollected taxes, which if collected would meet 2/3 of the deficit. But my members in PCS union who work in the HMRC, they've seen closure upon closure, job cuts, which means actually the HMRC is not properly resourced. If it was fully resourced, it could collect those taxes. And there are tax havens, the work that UK Uncut has been doing, around that issue. So they are ideological. They're not cuts that need to be made. We're all being told that we need to tighten our belts. Well, how far can you tighten your belt? If you've got nothing to survive off in the first place, you're struggling to make ends meet, you're worrying if you're going to keep the roof over your head from one day to the next, you can't make any further cuts. And this is what this government wants to see. They want to see the poorest in society driven into poverty. I call it death by poverty, because that's what they're trying to do. So really, if you look at everybody that's impacted by cuts, we make up the majority. Yeah. And, we've seen the 99% slogan that's been used by Occupy, and that's another organisation along with DPEC UK Uncut that Barrack has been working closely with over the past 3 years. And so it's important actually that all of those campaigns come together, because it's part of the same struggle, it's part of the same attack. It does impact on us differently, so it's quite right that we have a focus on disabled people, on black people, black women and young people and so on and so forth. We do need to, because our voices will not be heard otherwise. In the mainstream media, the right-wing press, we don't hear the stories about what are happening. What we hear is a demonisation of young black people, a demonisation of disabled people, and we need to counter and challenge those lies and the spin that's out there. All the attacks on migrants, that's another area Barrack campaigns on, because migrant workers are being told that they're benefit scroungers, they're coming here to claim benefits and take the housing. And the truth is that migrants contribute to the economy, we contribute to wider society, and we contribute to culture, and actually we benefit the economy when we set up businesses and we work here and pay taxes. So the idea that they're benefit scroungers, people that are coming to the country are only coming here to claim benefits, is a complete and utter lie, and we need to counter that, because the reality is that migrant workers actually claim less benefits than workers that are born in the UK. So I think that going forward, what needs to happen is we need a mass mobilisation, and actually that's what all of us here, aim to achieve. We need a mass mobilisation of everybody impacted by cuts, because we do make up the majority, and where our power lies, I don't think that we can rely on any of the mainstream political parties who right now are pandering to UKIP and their racist views. What we need to do is stand up together and assert our people power to fight the cuts.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Why don't you run for PM?
Excellent. Well, I have some questions, but actually I think I'd like to just open up to the floor. So does anyone have any questions for our panellists? Great.
Hiya. My mother works for a charity, well, she's the managing director of a charity in central London called Westminster Carers Service. They were a carers charity meant to help people help their families who are disabled and need constant care. They were completely funded by their local council, who have now cut their budget and they've been forced to close. So the problem is that these services are now not, it's not talking about saving them, they're gone. So where do we go to from here after, next?
Yep. Do you have any thoughts on that, Eleanor?
Yeah, about carers. I'm not sure about London, but I had an agency, because when I had a knee accident, which landed me in hospital, and I was sort of immobilized, well, even more than I am, for a few months, and I had a whole lot of carers. And all I can say is I really feel for them, because these are the people who work almost on zero contracts, and their traveling is not funded. So they have to, sometimes, some of my carers are very late. And I said, why are you late? And they said, because I couldn't catch the bus, or something happened to them. But they could be walking for 45 minutes to come and do something for me for half an hour. But their travel is not paid at all. So, and also, because of the way the local authorities do their commissioning, they always commission the people who are the agencies who give them the lowest quote. And these are the people who really abuse, I think, if I can say that, abuse their workforce. Because most of these workforce are immigrants, are people who are here who normally wouldn't have the right to work, so they couldn't get the sort of, the students, and people who are really poor. I mean, and to be honest, their standard of English isn't very good either, most of them. And I don't blame them, but it's, when you are the user, it's very difficult, because if they don't understand what you need, and you only have 15 minutes for them to do what you want, put you up on a hoist, take you to the toilet, give you a cup of tea, and they don't understand what you're saying, it's difficult. And so I think it's sort of difficult, the whole economy of the whole thing, and the way the local authorities commission it, because that's what the government and the cuts are doing. It's really, really hard for both, for the service user as well as those who are in the caring business.
Can I come in, maybe?
Yeah, sure, Rosie.
I think I was just thinking that, really sorry, that's really crap. I think from what I've seen about all the amazing women, firefighting for services, and it does feel like quite often, because obviously a lot of these women are affected themselves by the services they're using, or, they're being affected by the cuts in other ways. So it feels like a lot of the time in the anti-cuts movement, once a service is going to be cut, then it's like, go, 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 save, 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 which is so exhausting and tough, and then they get burnt out if they do or they don't save it, so they're just flat out and they can't do any more. And I think if there's any way that we can start to reimagine things more, so instead of always fighting for what we're losing, working together to try and demand what we want. So like the women, the E15 mums in Newham, they were just like, screw this, we're going to go occupy the Newham Housing Association, not necessarily to save services, but to demand new ones. So I think maybe there's more, there's an equal fight in saving what we have, but also reimagining and fighting for something else, something better.
maybe this is, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Eleanor.
No, I was just going to say, maybe this is the when we talk about a livable wage, and this is what, because then you would get good quality carers as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, actually, I was interested in asking you all whether you felt that the feminist movement should take up the living wage as a campaign at the moment. Would you like to see more of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's quite important because actually it's women that are being driven into deeper poverty, child poverty. We've got the highest child poverty across Europe in the UK, which is ridiculous in a country like the UK that's happening. And I think just something I want to say about actually the feminist movement. Feminist movements are not very inclusive to black women. Yeah, they often tend to be very middle class white women, and if it's really going to be a feminist movement, then it has to include all women, and that means black women, disabled women, LGBT women. No, completely. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just a question with regards to there was a defined expression by the Conservative that said a need for the big society. Where does that really fit into the statistics that have been presented today with regards to cutbacks? If it does equate with that, and also the needs for there is an established need for the services that are there in the midst of cutbacks. As you said, through goodwill, people are really trying their level best to keep those society, causes open and provide needs for the people. Where does that slogan, as it were, the big society, fit into all this? Because in the midst of all these so-called cutbacks and recession and the need for living this era of, austerity, where does it fit in?
Yeah. Who would like to talk to the big society? Yeah, Zita?
Well, the concept of big society introduced by the government was really a way of saying, well, everybody do all the work that was being done and paid before, so we can cut all the funding for all of this work and you do it instead. But the truth and reality is that women have always contributed to the societies we live in. We've always volunteered. We've always run community organisations, campaigns, volunteered to provide services. And actually, women as primary carers are, providing for families, extended families, neighbours, friends, every single day. So how much further can people go? How much more can we give? If we're already having to work full-time, there's a lot of black women having to do 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So there isn't any time for people to give of themselves. And it implied that actually we weren't doing that already before, and we were.
Yeah. Do you think women should go on strike for a day?
Might as well.
Yeah. It would bring everything to a standstill, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it would be a bit difficult if you're a carer, because if you're going on strike, then, who's the person who's going to be,
Well, this is
suffer.
a problem. Women would never do it, would they? And understandably, because women are usually primary carers. But there was a huge strike in Iceland in the 70s. All the women went out. I'm just putting it out there, just saying.
Well, I mean, you can cut. We haven't got anything planned for August, so we could give it a go.
Yeah, that might be a great idea.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. In terms of you saying, in some instances for black women, it's, I think you said 40 to 55% making up of redundancies. How would that be justified, or what would this sort of, what would be said? How would that be explained? And can you also just explain more about, especially this sort of single parent overrepresentation with black women? What further impact does that have? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the cuts, one of the things that Barrack has done throughout is to run workshops and provide the tools, because what we found, I mean, in those local authorities, there are trade unions, and it's their role to challenge the disproportionate impact. There should be equality impact assessments carried out before any of those cuts are made. And we know what the employers say is, oh, well, it's posts, it's not people. But the reality is you have to look at the people that fill those posts. And if there is a disproportionate impact, what they're supposed to do is take steps to avoid the disproportionate impact. And, you know, we should remember, actually, that the race equality duty, which is now a general equality duty through the Equality Act, came about because of the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. And what we're seeing is that that legislation has been watered down and weakened since this government came into power. So we need to pin down those organisations in the public sector that don't comply with the duty to look at the disproportionate impact on equality grounds, because it shouldn't get to that stage. You know, from the very point that they realise that there's a disproportionate impact, they should look at doing something different. But what they can also do is mitigate. And actually what we're seeing is that there's a backup of judicial review applications in the court, so it can take a year or 2 years, because I've been involved in taking those cases to judicial review. And actually by the time you get to court, the redundancies have already been made, the people have gone. And then the introduction of ET fees, Employment Tribunal fees, means that a lot of people won't go to Employment Tribunal on an individual basis unless they've got the backing and support of a union, you know, that are taking the case forward for them, because they can't afford to. And that's why the Justice Alliance, you know, the Cuts to Legal Aid, that campaign, which Barrack is also a part of, is so important, because actually it's barring access to justice for those that are most discriminated against. So for organisations, you know, like the gentleman there who said that his mother's organisation had been cut, one of the things we try and do is provide the tools, the support and the means of how you go about campaigning early on. But actually it really does need to be at the early stages, because it happens so fast, and once it's gone, it's gone. So there have been some successes in challenging, you know, through judicial review, through Employment Tribunal. But what I would say about that is, you know, legal process is important to use and use as a tool, but it's long and it's very difficult and it's not always successful, and actually it can set a negative precedent for future cases. So you have to be careful in terms of identifying strategic cases to take forward. What we really need to assert is our people power, like those Focus C15, young women, young mothers.
Yeah.
Can I?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Can I add something?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Sorry. I was listening to Zita. Which I should add that one of the things that, one of the campaigns that Sisters of Frida did was we went to Geneva with women NGOs all over the country, and the Southall Black Sisters was one of the NGOs, to confront the UK government with something called the CEDAW, which is a very long name, Commission for All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which some people call it Bill of Rights for Women. And there, the UN Commission, the UN CEDAW Commission actually gave some recommendations to UK government, and UK government has signed this. I know this is even seemed to be further away, that we're actually complaining to the UN, but I think that is one of the tools and one of the instruments that we can use from outside this country to actually complain and say what our government is doing to its own citizens.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nicola. Thank you very much. Really interesting discussion so far. I just wanted to get your thoughts. Obviously, everything in terms of cuts and austerity is a complete injustice, and it's clear for everybody to see. But what I was wondering is, what are we, as pretty much 50% of the population of this country, going to do to use our influence as half of the country to change what the political parties are doing? And do you think that a 50-50 gender equality at government level is going to make a difference, and how do we do that?
Eleanor, do you want to start on that?
I don't know. I'm not sure that just having women ministers means that they're going to service women's agenda. For example, I think it's Rachel Reeves, who's sort of said that she's not going to backtrack on any of the cuts. In fact, she might even do more than what the Tories are doing. I am at the moment in despair because, all my life I voted Labour. I actually don't know what I'm going to do now. So I don't know what else to say, really.
Is there a particular policy that you would like to see women mobilise around?
A policy right now?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's sort of very reactive. I don't know what the word would be. For example, the sort of the legal aid, because that is so important. Our rights are taken away, but if we don't have the means to go to court and challenge that, and most of the people who are poor, who are the people who are voiceless, they don't have the means, they don't know how to do it. And if we don't have legal aid, we can't challenge. There's no point having CEDAW, no point having rights for disabled people if we can't challenge.
Yeah.
Go to the European Court of Human Rights.
Okay. And so legal aid, and Rosie, what would you sort of hope people would mobilise around? And do you think 50-50 women in Parliament would make a difference?
So I work in my day job, I work for Compass, we're a left-wing think tank pressure group, so I work a lot with politicians, and I'm, equally despaired. But there are some gems out there as well. Caroline Lucas, she did a lot of stuff about No More Page 3, and she's, said a lot about women's equality. There's I think Stella Creasy's done some good stuff, and Lisa Nandy, and I also agree that just because we have more women in government doesn't mean they're going to fight the battles for more women's equality in the end. But also, I'd rather have women in there than all men. So it's a start. And I mean, we have to really dig deep. So, you look at Ed Miliband's team, and it's basically all men, and there's like one woman. No wonder they haven't got a decent childcare policy. So I think we also need to think about not just the ministers, but who's advising, the people making decisions on our behalf, who we have elected in, or not elected in, but got in anyway. Policies. I mean, there's so many. I think that I'm really interested in, as I was saying, kind of reimagining the economy, the stuff like 21-hour working week that a lot of people are doing. And that could be a really interesting way to rethink work and time and care. Yeah, so something that's sort of forward-looking rather than reactive, that's trying to be a bit utopian. Yes. In this beautiful utopia where everyone's equal.
And I think, sorry, can I just add one more? I was just occurred to me that it's not much policy, but actually being efficient and being and not having all these mistakes that this government is doing it's not policy, but it would be really great. So all these lies that the government has been coming through, and all the propaganda that when you prove it, like all these people that have been getting sanctions that shouldn't be sanctioned, all this is a complete waste of time and money for the courts. So and also, I mean, what we were saying earlier about people being sort of stigmatised as scroungers and that sort of thing. I mean, because it does feel like that sort of view has taken hold quite strongly, doesn't it? So I suppose anything that can be done to counter that.
Can I give you a good stat on that?
Yeah.
That benefit scroungers, which is a horrible word, makes up 0.7% of the total welfare budget. So when you're talking in the pub and someone moans about a benefit scrounger, bam them with a 0.7% of the welfare budget.
Actually, 0.5%. That's what I heard.
I don't know. TUC. Yeah.
All right.
Just going back to the original question, I think that we can't always rely on women to represent for women in politics. And actually, sometimes the higher up they go, the more they behave like men. So some would argue that actually why should they have to represent for women just because they're a woman? But actually, I think it's important if you're, holding political office that you do represent, and you are a positive role model, that you do inspire, and that you bring other women up with you. It was one of the things I aim to do, is to mentor, to support, and to bring other women, other black people up through the structures, of the trade union movement, for example, that I'm involved in. But I do think we need to hold them to task. And one of the things that I've been involved in is one of our organisations we work closely with is Operation Black Vote. And after the riots, we had Operation Hope and Recovery. And a key aim of those is voter registration, getting people to register to vote. Because if they're not registered to vote, then obviously they can't use their vote. But the other thing we have to look at is actually people aren't feeling very inspired by any of the mainstream parties. So what's the alternative? And we have seen some successes in local, councillor elections where independent candidates and, trade union candidates are standing. And I think we need to hold all of the politicians to task and all of the candidates, and hold a lot of question time events and challenge them. We have a parliamentary group in our trade union, most trade unions do, where we challenge all the politicians on what are they going to do about our issues when there's an election coming up. And that actually gives, informs our members in those constituencies about who they want to vote for based on what they're saying they're going to do about the issues we're concerned with.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, has anyone got any other questions? We're just coming to the end now, so...
There's one over there who hasn't...
okay, one over here, yeah.
Sorry, I was waiting before. I just wanted to ask, I saw recently that the government were thinking about getting rid of Atos and getting someone else to do the health assessments. Does anyone know what's going to be happening with that?
I think it depends on the region, and I can't remember. I think is it Circle? No, it's not Circle. That there is names that are being put out. I think it's good that ATOS is going, but I have no confidence that whoever replaced them would be any much better. I just want to deal the whole. I just want the whole process to get the old assessment process to disappear. I think that would be good news. But I've been campaigning against ATOS for some time now, and been tackled by the police actually for mounting the first, when as DPAC we mounted the first protest against ATOS. So I'd be really, really happy to see them go. But as I said, I'm not very confident that whoever the government brings in to replace them would be much better. But let's wait and see. Yeah, let's wait and see. Fingers crossed. Okay, so thank you so much to everyone here today. Thanks to Eleanor Lisney, to Rosie Rogers, and to Zita Holbourne. And I hope there is some cause for optimism in terms of all the kind of mobilisation that's going on at the moment. And thanks for coming today. Thank you.